A fresh take. Sorry, put myself in the picture. Welcome to A Fresh Take, Culture and Comics. It has been a while since I've done one of these longer interview shows. It has been so busy. I did drop a short rapid reaction to the Jim Gunn news about him taking over at the DCU or DCU. So check that out. And I've got a couple pieces coming up, quick hitters on some Marvel key books that I think are flying under the radar, including how I think Hobgoblin might get introduced to the MCU, as well as some links I'm seeing coming together about how we're going to get Miles Morales in the MCU as well. So those will be coming up. But I will, end my preamble there. We've got a really fun show topic tonight. We are going to be talking about Andor and the Rings of Power and the way their sort of world building and approaches to sort of bringing life and three-dimensionality to their characters, the heroes, the villains, the town folk, the judicious officials, the everything is bringing kind of a new life to the IP era. So I've got a great guest to discuss that. I'm going to bring her in right now. Welcome,
Hey.
Andy.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Andy, you have a podcast.
I do.
Right? Talking with Friends. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and where people can find it?
Yes. So I have a podcast with some of my friends called Talking with Friends. It's kind of, you get it? It's kind of like a fun with
your friends about Tolkien.
Yeah. So, obviously I'm saying like Tolkien's name wrong, but don't at me. So the whole idea is that we are comparing and contrasting the Peter Jackson movies to the Lord of the Rings books. We are still releasing Lord of the Rings content right now, but we're already gearing up for season 2, if you want to call it, for The Hobbit. So that's going to be a lot of fun. You can find us pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts, especially things like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. And you can follow along on Twitter at Tolkien Friends or Instagram, which is Tolkien with Friends. It was too long, too many characters to have the full name for Twitter. But you get it. You'll find us. Yeah. And then myself, I'm on TikTok as Andy INC, just because I started that before the podcast, so it's a little different.
Yeah, no, and I'm grateful to have you on as a guest. I enjoy Lord of the Rings. I've read those books. I, like everyone else on Earth, have seen the Peter Jackson films, and The Hobbit was probably one of my first fantasy loves growing up. But I'm far from an expert. And I was pretty legitimately skeptical about the series for a variety of different reasons, and
that's fair.
Really adored it. Became a big hit for me personally, and just in our house in general. My daughter is now dressing as Galadriel for Halloween, so it's been a real hit. And we've been enjoying it quite a bit. So, and then you're caught up on Andor as well.
I am as of 2 hours ago.
Great. And just top line, are you enjoying that show?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's funny because when I first sat down and watched it, maybe when there was probably too much going on in my life, and we've watched most of the first episode, and then I was like, I don't know, maybe we'll get back to it. But then once we got I kind of binge watched a bunch of it recently, and I was like, okay, yeah, next episode, and then I ran out of episodes.
Yeah. So. And yeah, I shouldn't limit it to that. I was very skeptical about Andor. I've found, generally speaking, this era of Star Wars content to be pretty meh.
For best. Andor, it came out of nowhere for me. I was like, oh, they're doing they're doing a show? Okay.
It had been on my radar actually for a while. But it was probably the thing I was most excited for, but because I kind of felt like so much was disappointing, I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. I mean, I found the Obi-Wan show pretty much unwatchable, but yeah, I'm loving it. So anyway, we'll get there when we'll get there. So 2 shows I was skeptical about that have won me over. And I think, well, one question before we get forward on that. What's your top line response to the Rings of Power? Because it is a pretty unique thing in this IP era, right? Because if I'm understanding it right, they sort of have rights to some stuff and not rights to other stuff, and they're filling in certain blanks, right? So
Right.
how can you talk a little bit about that? I don't want to get people lost in the weeds there, but like how are they doing that from your perspective as somebody who knows a lot of that stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that I like for me and a lot of my friends, there's been a lot of like highs and also a lot like several lows, and then also things that we were just kind of like, okay, but I think overall it's been a good show. I think it's one of those for me personally that I'm really gonna have to see what they do in season 2 to decide if it's something that
Mm-hmm.
like I absolutely am obsessed. You know what I mean? It's one of those that and another problem I think with me watching it is that at this point in my life, it almost felt like I had to watch it.
That's
Um,
how I feel about the Marvel movies. I understand.
yeah, like, and so I don't know, I just felt like I had to have thoughts about it instead of
Mm-hmm.
just letting it kind of like wash over me. But I will say that like because of, my friends and New Better Do Better specifically, like I got to see the first 2 episodes early and with a group of my friends, and I think that was like I mean, it set up I mean, I was just so the energy in that room was so beautiful that like I mean, I really thoroughly enjoyed my experience with the first 2 episodes, and so then having to, like, do it at my house the rest of the time, like, is, like, a little different, you know?
Right.
But
Sure.
but but overall, I think it's obviously a beautiful show. I think that the actors
You can see the
and
money that Amazon spent. That's for sure.
yeah, absolutely, and you really see, like, the love and appreciation that the actors and the showrunners have for the source material, even though so technically they only have rights to, the same thing that Peter Jackson had, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and that having Lord of the Rings means you have the appendices, which gives you, like, an outline of the Second Age, which is what they are working with,
They're
but there
basically
have
flushing
been
out the appendices.
exactly, but there have been some name drops that obviously link them to having a little bit more than what they've said.
Right.
So I think that the Tolkien estate is working with them on what they can include. So it's just, I think it'll be really interesting to see where it goes, but I think that there's a lot of potential. I think it was a really fun first season.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't want to imply that I think either of these shows. I mean, I prefer Andor of the two, but
Hmm.
they're different enough that I don't think they need to be compared directly.
No,
Um uh but I think but neither are flawless shows. Certainly
right.
there's some moments that get a little hokey, but that is the genre to an extent too. And a couple of questions I'm not sure about, and actually I'm hoping you can clarify because I wasn't sure how I was supposed to read a scene, but we'll get to them.
Sure.
But what I do think, aside from just gorgeous production design, they're both just
Mm,
crushing it there.
yeah.
Um, a unifying theme, and what I'm kind of most interested in exploring here is like it's not new to say, oh, the villain has texture, or like the good guys aren't flawless. Like that's not new. But I
Mhm.
do think, and we were talking a little bit off air about this in this era, this IP era where IP kind of dominates and genre spin-offs dominate the media landscape. We
Mhm.
went from a place where, um, when you had something like the Lord of the Rings films, it was a massive happening
Yeah.
because it was rare.
Mhm.
Um, and you saw these beloved things brought to life. In the last 20 years, we've really seen a cultural shift where this is the dominant form of media entertainment we get. And there are pluses and minuses that come with that. But I do think we went from like a scarcity of it to an overabundance of it. And
True.
now people are struggling, I think, with how to navigate that overabundance. And I do think we've talked a lot on this show and other episodes about the idea that like people feel like it either has to be like absolutely great or it's trash. And I think that's a
Mm.
little bit of the problem, the overabundance. But
Yeah.
my larger concern, sorry, I'm rambling. I'll shut up for a
No.
minute here.
No, you're good.
My larger concern here is if we have the overabundance and we don't find new ways to share those stories and present those stories, then people are going to get bored we will see a dwindling return, and we'll lose access to folks like us who love some of the source material. And I think both these shows are presenting a roadmap of how you can present what could be kind of like heavily treaded water or paths in kind of new and refreshing ways. And I'll shut up for a second. Is that an experience you're having?
Yeah, I think that that's something where, for Rings of Power, from my perspective, it's something that I think a lot of fans never expected to see. And I think that, we never thought we were going to get into any of the other ages, you know what I mean? And especially the second age where there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of holes to be filled. And I think that the showrunners are using that as an opportunity to go places, to new places with these stories and with these things that feel familiar, but like pushing it to new areas and giving us new thought starters and new things to fall in love with, which I think is lovely. And then with Andor, as me as more like a casual Star Wars fan, I mean, I loved Rogue One. I think it's one of my absolute favorite Star Wars movies.
Agreed.
But I never really thought we were going to go back. You know what I mean? Like, because we kind of started with the end as far as these characters are concerned. Right. But I'm really glad that we did. I mean, I think that Cassian is a really cool character, and I'm glad that we get to see him again. And I think that thinking through, like, because Cassian was never like a typical hero, you know what I mean? Like, even from the beginning. So I think even seeing that journey of like, so how do you get there?
Right.
It's really cool to see.
And Gilroy has the creator, showrunner has talked a lot about how the rules have changed substantially from the Lucasfilm folks about what they could and couldn't do. Like just the reins were much tighter on Rogue One than they are now, and you can see that. So let's be a little more specific, and I should say at this point, like, this is not a spoiler-free conversation. So if you haven't watched these, or if you haven't watched them, you haven't finished them, and you don't want any spoiler, it's pretty hard for us to have this conversation without that. So go watch them, catch up, and then come back and watch this. Even as simple as, like, again, it's not revolutionary to give the bad guys a reason to do what they want to do. But to me, specific to Rings of Power, for example, the idea that the orcs, which were, I mean, as one-dimensional as something can be presented to us, at least in media, and maybe they've got a little bit more richness in the books, but at least in TV and film, this idea of wanting a home to call theirs, of wanting to be an accepted race, of seeing their own value of their lives equivalent to other races, is just a breathtakingly simple and beautiful concept.
Yeah, I think that one thing, and I think not only the depiction of the orcs, I mean, it was just like everything you wanted an orc to be, right? Like, you see them and you're like, yes. And then the fact that they aren't just, I mean, they're tougher, they're harder to fight than we've previously seen because of the way that, especially if you're thinking about Peter Jackson in particular, he used them kind of as cannon fodder, and not only because it's true, yes, from Sauron and the Third Age, just he has an abundance of them. He doesn't need, he's more thinking about strength and numbers, not necessarily skill. Okay. But the fact that, but these are, like, they are autonomous beings, they have some agency, and an idea that gets played with in Lord of the Rings, especially in a conversation that Sam overhears by these orcs that he's following in order to find Frodo after he's captured, like he's, incapacitated by Shelob, and then he is taken to the Tower of Kid Thungol, and Sam is following the orcs. Sure. The part where he's like, the spider part.
Yeah, the spider part. There we go. Yeah. Now I gotcha.
He's passed out. Sam thinks he's dead at first, and he's like, oh, stupid Sam. And so then he follows the orcs to where he's being kept, and he overhears these orcs talking, and they're like, man, once the war's over, like, let's go find a place of our own and just like do our own thing. And it doesn't happen in the movie. This is only in the book.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they're like basically talking about the idea that even that they hate Sauron, but if they left, everyone else hates them too. So they don't really have a choice but to
Mhm.
be the bad guys in that situation. And so the idea that, like, of course, the orcs in Rings of Power are not necessarily making nice decisions, right?
No.
But they are following, so they obviously have a clear relationship with Adar. They call him father.
Mhm.
Adar means father, right? And
Mhm.
so, and if you'll remember, Liv Tyler calls Elrond at like Ada in
Oh,
the
okay.
movie, and that's daddy.
Right,
So,
right.
so a little
Right, right.
cuter,
The
yeah. So
diminutive. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so like they and the way that Adar treats them is clearly with a lot of love and care. And
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful exploration of kind of a thought starter that's in Lord of the Rings, and then taking that to another level. And of course, thinking about, so in this point in time, there is no like Sauron. He's around, but he isn't
Right. He's
organizing in the
not.
way that you see him later. And so they're not necessary. I was, and when this show was first announced, I was like, are they going to show us like leaderless orcs and what orcs just do when they're just orking around? But they
Mhm.
did give them a leader a
Orking
little
around.
bit. Orking
Yeah.
around.
Orking
But
around. That
they,
should have been the title of the episode. Orking
I,
around with
I
Dan and
think
Andy. All
I'm gonna
right.
go rename all of them.
I like it.
But yeah, so like they do give them kind of a leader, but it is a father figure. It's somebody that they love and appreciate, and somebody that they has their best interests at heart. And I think that that's a fascinating area to explore. Please don't kill Adar in season
Mm.
two soon.
Yeah,
um
I've got Adar Sauron questions for you for sure.
yeah.
But even so, that was actually one of the first moments where I was like, oh, okay, was when we get introduced to the orcs and they're digging the tunnels and they've sort of
Hmm.
chained the elves and they have them right and our I'm gonna forget all the character names. I
It's
apologize,
fine.
but our sort of like our hero elf guy.
Arondir.
Um, Thank you. And Arandir, and they've had the fight, and they get him, and they're waiting for Adar. Right? There's
Hmm.
this moment where our whatever, like you said, they're orcs, like vicious, fighting, scary, whatever. And then all of a sudden, you're watching them interact like community. That
Hmm.
he's witnessing them and seeing them, and it took me a second to like kind of catch on what was happening directorially, but
Right.
basically what he's stupefied with is like even the idea that the orcs would have some kind of like societal structure outside of just it being military, caring for each other, standing over their injured and dying friend, peer,
Yeah.
and father coming. I mean
And like
that.
the gentleness that Adar has with that orc that
Right,
is,
right,
he's mortally wounded.
right.
But the way that they just look at each other, I'm like, wow, like
Yeah,
there
it was
is a
fantastic.
genuine love and care for each other there.
Yeah. And another thing that, and with on the flip, I'm going to jump back and forth between these shows,
Yeah.
but like with Andor, and I think Andor does this exceptionally well, is it's not even just um the resistance or the rebellion or
Mhm.
whatever forms it's taking and the empire. It's like just the lives of all these people trying to exist in the
Yeah.
circumstances, just
Yeah.
what they go through, and giving that um you know giving that a fullness that I just think is so sort of incredible. And like the idea that, and we learn this as the piece goes on, that essentially they're trying to get the empire to come down on them hard. They
Mm.
want that force because they need to spur up the rebellion. They need to spur up the people to fight back. And how morally clouded that becomes,
Yeah.
that it is for the greater good. And they even talk about it like sacrifices have to be made to the greater good. And that's a little bit like, whoa, okay. I mean, okay, so lives are going to be lost to get this accomplished. And I just think that hasn't been that sort of blatantly explored in these worlds before.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it makes you think about how I think in both shows where these are stories, especially when you think about like the original Star Wars or like the Peter Jackson movies. It very much feels like good guy
So
is
I'm getting
good.
fantasy football alerts. Hold on, sorry, I have
Oh,
to close
good.
something. I apologize. I apologize if you guys just heard that
It's the
on
wrong kind
camera.
of
I
fantasy.
know. I'm sorry. It was just my iPad dinged. I apologize. I just closed it. Go on.
But so we've got like good guy good, you know, pretty much, even though I mean there was like Han Solo or whatever, and like yeah, but
Right.
he's
Right.
like
Right.
good
Right.
guy. And then bad guy, very bad, we're all black.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But then
Mm-hmm.
with these shows, I think they're even
Blow up
they're
planet.
yeah, like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
both exploring even like the moral ambiguity of the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, that absolutely.
yeah, so like we see, like I think you explained it really well with Andor, and then on the flip side with Galadriel and Elrond and people that we've seen before that we think of as like peak elf, perfect in every way. But then that scene with Galadriel and Adar, like she's like sounding a little genocidal, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like the
Yeah.
words she uses, it makes you kind of think like for a second you're like no, like I'm on Adar's side on this one,
Right.
like and it's like you never would have thought you would have felt that way. And then with things
Yeah.
like Gilgalad, like the High Elven King, with him like wanting to send Galadriel away, and it's like everybody's trying to do what they think is right, but ultimately, was it? They're kind of
Right.
exploring these different ideas there.
Yeah, and also like you know, uh it's the reveals. It's not that the reveals, oh, okay, yeah, he saw it. Like if you've watched enough of this stuff, you kind of knew that was coming, or at least you would hypothesize it. And
Everyone was guessing. Yeah.
right, everyone's guessing and who this might be and who that. Right, okay. But it's the more subtle stuff, right? So,
Mm.
um, the dwarven prince, his name
Durin.
is Durin, and right, okay, this Durin and Durin, right?
Yeah.
His wife, right? Who basically, for the majority of the series, you couldn't like anyone more, right?
Yeah.
She was as likable as you possibly can. The last scene I think we have with her is incredibly Lady Macbeth. I mean, it is incredibly like, yes, she's supporting her husband, and yes, she thinks they have the better idea, but it's her talks of like, and we'll run this thing, and we'll have power, and like, there, even when you're like lulled kind of all the way in there on someone, you get a reveal that it isn't a 180 twist. It's
Right.
like, no, there's more colors here, and
Yeah.
I just find that so invigorating.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's I'm loving what they're doing with like these new characters that we never would have thought we would see. And like same thing with the Harfoots, right? Like they're very community oriented, like they're very sweet and adorable, but then and they're saying things like nobody goes off trail, nobody walks alone, and you think, oh, that's sweet, they like really keep together. That's more of a command than like like a community building thing. That's more of like,
Yeah.
don't, if you do that, you're out.
Yeah.
It's
Or
like
you're
a
in the
more of a
back.
warning. Yeah,
You're in the
like
back, and yeah, you're still with us. You're just in the back, but back means death sentence, basically.
yeah, and it's like, oh, okay, like they're a little hardcore, they're a little more brutal than you would maybe think, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense for like the way that they're able to survive in this big world when they're so tiny. But it's we think of hobbits as just the hobbits have a lot of layers to them, and I think that they're definitely exploring those as well.
So let's think. I mean, I could go back and forth with examples of this, and maybe we continue it, but let's sink in a little bit there. Talk to me a little bit about the hobbits, and it seems to me like there's a good bit of gap between those of us that primarily have experienced through Peter Jackson's eyes and the literature. Can you like riff on that a little bit?
Sure. So, what's interesting is that, hobbits are explicitly stated as not a group that the big people or like elves and men really took notice of until Bilbo, right?
Mm,
So, they show up vaguely in some early timelines, but they've also said in the beginning of Lord of the Rings that they've been there since the Elder Days, just nobody really noticed. And I think that I'm really interested to see where they go with that, because basically the hobbits don't or can't have any like obvious effects on the events of the world, but I'm hoping that they expand on the way that, so we know that Bilbo takes the ring. It's seemingly harmless. He's able to do a few good things with it, right? And then he goes back to the Shire, and it's kind of like nobody thinks any more of it except for Gandalf. And that is like a domino effect that leads to Lord of the Rings. And so what are the other ways the hobbits may have affected things without really being obvious? And so, and that's like free for them to explore. Like they can come up with so many different things based on the actual events that we get. And, they're compressing the timeline a little bit. So they have some more wiggle room in some ways there too. But basically there's, three kind of like groups of hobbit, and there's the Harfoot, Stores, and Fallowhides. Fallowhides being like the more numerous. That's more of like Sam's ancestry, I believe. And then the Harfoots are another group, and so that's obviously who they chose to portray in this. And like the theorizing is that Gollum was a Stoor, and they're more like prone to being near the water. And that's like a not very numerous kind of hobbit.
So I've just been sort of assuming that we're gonna get some kind of like lineage reveal to Gollum somewhere along this.
They could, or they might do it with. I'm interested to see if they end up crossing the Anduin, or like getting closer to the Misty Mountains at any point.
So somebody just asked, actually. Here's a question. Here's a question for you on cue.
That's my man. That's Tim.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Right. He planted one.
He's thinking my thoughts.
Good job. So yeah, explain what that means to me.
So the Misty Mountains, those we've already kind of seen them. That's where Elrond enters into Khazad-dûm, and basically on the other side, where the Fellowship in the Fellowship of the Ring exits the Misty Mountains after their whole Balrog encounter, there should be our hobbits should end up somewhere over there, and they're already in Greenwood the Great, which is hashtag Mirkwood. So it's pre-Mirk. Now it's green and awesome and lovely, and pre like Sauron ickiness. So they're there. So I feel like they're kind of making their way that way. I'm interested to see what they mean by the grove that they said that they were headed for.
So here's the thing, and I don't. Maybe I'll. This will be my last question heading this far down this tangent, because we're drifting a little afar, which is easy to do with this kind of material. But with the stranger who we learn is of the race of wizards, and I forget the word for it, is Istar. Yeah. And the Hardfoots, and that pairing, to me at least, seems like an obvious nod to the very early relationship that we get between the wizards and the hobbits, right? It's a clear nod to down the road and where we're heading like that. So maybe that idea of where they influence things outside of the sight of man or whatever, or the big folk or whatever, is actually that their appreciation from wizards, which is the wise, right, starts early on, and that's how they have an influence that outsizes, no pun intended, their role.
I mean, it's interesting that Nori is going to go to Rune with the stranger, who's most likely Gandalf. I
was wondering. Well, I'll ask you that later. Anyway, that's
yeah, but it's like I mean, that's something that's never mentioned, so like they could come up with any kind of storyline there.
Right. I just wonder what Gandalf would predate. Like, shouldn't Saruman predate Gandalf in this world?
I think that if Tim in the chat wants to correct me, but I believe that the blue wizards come first, and then it's like Saruman and Radagast, and Gandalf reluctantly comes to Middle Earth only because he's like asked to, but he's really the best one. But they're
I mean, that twinkle he had, the twinkle that actor had in his eyes was clearly, at least, if not direct, to evoke.
I mean, and the thing about follow your nose.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, it's very on. But to that same extent, when what's the song that's being sung in the water with the pail with the best friend Hartfoot who's singing?
the
Do you know what I'm
Wandering
talking about?
Day, yeah, yeah.
She not their long wandering off when she's
Oh,
like in the with the pail in the water and then she drops it because the cult
oh,
people, like that's evoking Gollum,
I
the
see what you're
splashing around in the
saying.
water, and I think there's even some textual stuff there.
That's
I feel
interesting because they've specifically decided to call them Harfoots, but maybe
mm,
they're going to try to imply that Harfoots split off into other groups of
I don't
hobbits at
know.
some point. They could. They
Yeah.
could.
All right, let me get back on our main topic here. So,
Sure.
obviously, so I think something that is clear in the text and is certainly alluded to even in the films we've seen, but just as like mentions, but
Mhm.
is not featured in any way, is the idea of that within the good, right? The non Sauron crowd, it
Mhm.
was the fracturing and mistrust and whatever, and depending on whose perspective is telling the story, it's different people's fault, right? But it is
Yeah.
their failings to unite and put their greeds aside that they weren't able to stand up, right?
Mhm.
But we really didn't see much of this, at least in the Jackson films, that they're showing us a lot of, right? Which leads me to, obviously there's Galadriel leads the battles and rah rah rah, and we win and everything's great, and then the tunnels blow up, and
Yep.
I led him to this and he did that, and so on. So what is your read? Because this I was confused about. What is your read of that final scene when those three rings are forged? And Elrond finds the scroll, right? And kind of
Mhm.
puts the story together and walks back in. And Galadriel has just told them to make the three, right? Is
Yes.
she under Sauron's control? Is it her grasp of
No.
power? Is
Yes.
it what do you talk to me?
So for that, I think that this is something that I probably would have done a little bit differently, but the way that but I believe that Galadriel right now is she essentially in the lore, Galadriel comes to Middle Earth because she wants a land of her own, right? That's something that's obviously on the table. It's something that's on her mind. She wants to have a place that she rules. That's not wrong. And so they haven't really explored that yet because they've really had her like kind of zero in on this obsession with Sauron, which I don't really have a problem with. But then it's something that I'm grappling with currently about her knowing that the Halbrand reveals himself as Sauron,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that Halbrand helped Celebrimbor, and maybe they're going to imply that she doesn't understand at this point like how Sauron being a part of that process is harmful until later. Um,
But she had that look, that look
yeah,
had the look of like knowing. Like there was a look of knowing she was,
yeah.
I don't know, sinister is too strong of a word, but like there,
Yeah, I
you
think
know what I
that
mean?
she is hoping. My guess is that she is hoping that this will be powerful enough to stop him when he comes back, because she obviously
Mm-hmm.
believes that he's gonna try to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's kind of where they're going with it. Obviously, Celebrimbor. So I think that they're also
Because he was
using.
definitely under the
Yeah,
sort of,
Celebrimbor is like he is swayed. Like he is like, I
yeah,
like these compliments, keep it
right,
coming,
right.
you know. But
But he's
then with
literally using the language of Sauron, right? So he's
yeah,
using. So the implication there is that he's in his head.
yeah.
That's why I thought maybe.
So I think
Um,
with Galadriel and Elrond, they're kind of like our best of the best insofar as like their intuitiveness. And I think that they're also showing that their friendship is really strong and that Elrond is taking his cues from Galadriel. Like she's the queen bee, she's older than pretty much
mm,
everybody. But Elrond is like, I'm going to trust you with this, but it feels a little sus, with
mm,
him holding the scroll. I think that if it's not obvious that Halbrand was Sauron, I think he realizes that he was probably misleading them about who he was. I'm
mm-hmm.
interested to see how this plays out in season 2, but I think that Galadriel is moving forward with the rings, kind of in good faith, in that she is probably hopeful that they will be able to do the real work of fighting Sauron, because ultimately Sauron is not of this world, right? He said he's been around since before, like, the breaking of the first silence. I think that
Mhm.
was a really cool line, but essentially people like Sauron and Gandalf in their original form, like they can't be killed in a
Right.
regular way. So the fact that she tries to stab him, I think, is kind of funny, because I'm like, that's not gonna work, sweetie. But yeah.
So one of the things that we see played out a couple different times in Rings, and more so in Andor, and so I'm going to jump back here, is the impact the decisions to fight and take action against the powers that be or whatever impact negatively so many people around them. And we know about the Galadriel, the battle, the the ships that arrive from Numenor. Did I
Yes.
get that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And all that kind of stuff. With Andor, and it's really, they really drill it home this most recent episode, that the robbery, which, was framed initially as, oh, this will really hit the Empire where it hurts, taking money from them, whatever, that really the impact was these men imprisoned had sentences doubled and tripled and are never going to see life, see the sky again.
Right.
The Which, by the way, if you've watched The Bad Batch, that's there's that prison they're in is where The Bad Batch, the season finale, I think, takes place.
Oh my god!
Go back and watch that again.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the decaying
Really?
underground, and what I put it together was the tunnel, because I'm not a deep Star Wars guy, but like those tunnels where everyone's passing through, that's what they're like running through to get from one station. They have to go underwater. It's the same place, that prison colony. So
That's
that makes
smart.
sense.
That's smart.
It's
Thank
very
you,
smart.
Andor.
Good job. But like, and they're talking about these new things that are being passed, these new powers that are being passed on, and then you see it in where Cassian has been living these years, that it's basically a military state now, and his sort of surrogate mom is cracking. She's such a good actress, but anyways, cracking under the pressure.
You know what's funny about that? I was like, oh my god, where do I know her from? And then I was like, oh my god, it's Petunia.
You know her from a million things.
I know.
She's in so much stuff. She's such a good actress. She's also in Killing Eve. If you watch Killing Eve.
Yep. Okay.
She's
glorious.
She's one of our one of our best working actors. My apologies. So, you're seeing the pressures really screw down and tighten on, the people there, and then, and sort of that collateral damage, and then, you pull back even further to realize, no, that's the plan. They want that tightening down, and it's a little bit ambiguous whether they actually, the rebellion and the kind of people that put it in place, want to find Cassian to take him out or not. It's a little ambiguous, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of like ambiguity about the command or the order to do it,
So, and it's so interesting, because for a lot of Star Wars, it's felt like, very much like community rallying against big corporate empire. And here we do have like, a lot more. We see a lot more of the innards of that corporate structure, right? And how that trickles down in a lot of different ways. But at the same time, the version of the rebellion that we're currently seeing, we're not on the ground with a lot of the people that are like, we've seen a little bit of it with the first group, like, oh, this is like, my heart's really in it. But we're also seeing people that are just like, oh, like they hate the Empire, but they're not necessarily like radicals.
It'd be cool if I could just like go to work and then like
and then we also see, like oh, what's his name? Bill Skarsgård. Character. He is him, and the senator friend of his,
Mothra.
They're like kind of calling a lot of shot. It's at this point, or at this focal point of the story. Like we're only seeing a few people kind of really making decisions, and so it's
Pulling my
just a really
character list
interesting.
real quick. Luthen. Luthen.
Yes, Luthen. Yeah, so
Luthen and
like
Mon Mothma.
yeah, you see them kind of making these bigger decisions for a whole movement, which I think is a really interesting idea. It's like not a part of the rebellion that I think we've really seen before.
No, and the brokering of what makes a rebellion, right? The
Mhm.
Forrest Whitaker reveal, to
Oh,
bring that character back.
that
And
was like a
honestly,
love
like
song.
that's the best work we've seen from Forrest Whitaker in a long time, too. I mean, he was working. And just the idea of like who has principles, who knows who they are, why are they fighting, that person's a madman, and what it takes, like to unify that. I mean, that's what he's
Mhm.
trying to build. He's trying to unify a resistance.
Mhm.
And how hard that is. And we see it even in that mission, in the team they put together, even to pull off the robbery, right? They put together that mission to hold on one second, I apologize, got too many electrical devices binging at once. But you've got the true believer, and with the manifesto, the radical at his heart. You've got the mercenary who's there to get his. You've got the person who's doing the right thing, but it's for like love. You've got the person who's doing it for their community and is putting everything else
Mhm.
aside. And like, I just think even thinking about that, like, yes, there was sort of like, obviously there's Han and Leia, but like the actual implications of relationship under these
Mhm.
conditions was never really explored. I mean, we're getting like earnest portraits of variety of functional and dysfunctional relationships.
Mhm.
That goes back to kind of my larger statement here, which is if we're going to checking. Sorry, I got a compliment on my X-Men lunchbox in the
Oh, that's
background. I
awesome.
appreciate it. I enjoy it. It's from my youth. Um, if we're going to what was my point before the X-Men lunchbox threw me off? So going to the larger point of like, if we're going to continue to and I'm looking at you, MCU.
It's like
If
MCU
we're
where?
if we're going to continue to uh, create content in this era and have it be vibrant, we're going to have to, yes, fantastical circumstance, but we're going to have to find more realized life within it. And I think these
Mhm.
shows are just doing such a good job. I mean, these are ridiculous circumstances. Rings
Of
of
course.
Power is more ridiculous because we're dealing with completely other, right?
Yeah.
But both, completely fictionalized things. And like, kudos to the production design teams on both those shows. They're just incredible.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
in Andor, it's almost its own character. It's incredible. But like, one of the reasons why I really enjoyed Miss Marvel in this current
Mhm.
phase of the
Mhm.
MCU was frankly just the portrayal of her and her family. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't that I thought the show was flawless, or I think the pacing on all this is this whole side story. I think the pacing on the Disney Plus era has been problematic.
Mhm.
That's another show. But what I loved about that show was the honest portrayal of the family. And I think we're
Yes.
going to need some of that. We're going to need to see what the sort of like the tactile sense of these people's lives and the impact of having those lives. Um, if we're going to continue to find relatability in an overabundance of fantasy stories, sci-fi stories,
Mm.
greater than stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's been, I mean, we have like a plethora of stories and even like original Lord of the Rings where it's particularly thinking about the movies, like it's like big stakes, and it's like a big battle and it's like this world-ending choices, but it's interesting to think about how these little choices that we make and these relationships that we just have in our everyday, how does that ladder up to said big event, and I am fascinated by the Numenor story in Rings of Power. I think that I love what they're doing with Elendil and his son Isildur. I think that that's really beautiful. I think that you see a lot of love between Isildur and his sister Eärien.
Yeah,
She hasn't
though
gotten a lot of
her
time to shine, but
I feel like she changed character almost completely in the
yeah.
later episodes. I was a little confused. Like, that felt like a rushed storyline for me.
Yeah, I
But
agree, but I think that when they, at least if we just think about like her setting up Isildur and her. You can see that they go to each other for, advice,
Mhm.
and there's like a real, a real relationship there.
Their first
And
scene together crackles with reality. It just does. Like that. It felt like me and my sister like giving each other shit. Like that's what it
yeah,
felt like.
yeah,
You know.
absolutely. And it's like and the way Elendil is dads with Isildur, I think, is wonderful. Like he really
Yeah.
pushes Isildur to be better. And I think that
Yeah.
it's and but you see like Isildur bristle at that some of that a little bit, like very young man would. Yes, all young people kind of do with their parents.
Well, and even that impulsive youth. I mean, our human townsfolk crew, right? We've got
Mm-hmm.
the woman who's in the relationship with the elf. I'm sorry, I
Bronwyn and
can't remember
Arondir.
these names.
I got
Yeah,
it. I got you.
her son, who
Yes.
finds that sword slash key slash, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's his teenage angst basically that
Totally.
screws the whole thing up. But like that's real.
Yeah.
Teenage angst will overscrew things. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Every time.
and oh, every time. And they're just they're living in this world. They're going to have an impact in this world, and that story is likely not showing up in your history textbook of that world. It's not
Mm-hmm.
showing up in your appendices of
Right.
the
And
Lord of the
even
Rings
like his
trilogy.
relationship with his mom, with Theo and Bronwyn, I think that that's something that some fans, they didn't buy it at first, but I'm like, I get it. Like she's a single mom with a teenage son. Like there's a lot going on there. But I think
Yeah.
that when like towards the end when they're really having a struggle, I think that
And
they're
he's the only attractive mom in the whole village, apparently. That's got to be a burden,
I know
you
it's
know?
rough.
They
And there's
really, they
elves
really went,
hanging around, and
they
people
really went
obviously
out of
don't
their
like
way to have
elves.
one attractive human. Like there's one. That's it. Yeah, we get it.
That's
We
all
get it.
you
We
get,
get it.
Danny. That's all
Yeah,
you get.
they really drove that point home. But anyway, go.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that we get to. We've seen a lot of guys in this village.
A
Honestly,
lot of
I
guys.
hope we get to see some more of the ladies. Of Middle Earth, as well as,
Okay.
and we've seen, there's Muriel, who's the Queen Regent in Numenor, and there's Aadian, and we've seen a few young ladies with the soldier boys, but
Yeah.
interested to see if they expand on getting to know some of the other people of Middle Earth. I'm interested to see. My prediction, I'm assuming that next season we're going to get to see Sauron out and about and schmoozing some more people, so I'm
Mm.
interested to see who those people might be, and do we know them already or not.
So let me ask you this question, which is a little off topic, but I think as we head towards season 2, or even as we reflect on season 1,
Mm-hmm.
is there anything from the texts or even fan conversation for like those that in deeper that you feel like it's not spoiler to share, but would give a richer viewing experience to the more casual viewer? Is there a piece of lore or history that you think is would be
Yeah,
great to keep in mind?
I think that keeping in mind, like, I think that what we've seen from Gilgalad so far isn't like, all of our characters are clearly on a journey. They're all on some
Mhm.
kind of arc, and I think
That's
that
the Tolkien
uh,
way.
yeah, and so with Gilgalad, I don't think that this is the ultimate version of Gilgalad. I think that he is going to
Mm.
grow in a lot of ways and really show himself as a great leader. So I think that that's something to really look forward to. And I think as well with the Isildur and Elendil, I think that we know Isildur as, cast it into the fire, and he goes, no, right? In Peter Jackson's film, I think I mean, there's a whole thing on Tolkien Talk about Yeet Isildur. I'm hoping that by the end of the show, you no longer want to yeet Isildur into the fire. He does some really cool stuff in the Second Age. He is a real one, and I'm excited. I know, like, right now we're not quite sure where he is, but we do know that that is an endpoint for him, and so I'm interested
Mm.
to see more of Elendil and Isildur and especially Isildur as he kind of grows into himself and grows up a little bit. Um, as well as with Galadriel, I think that she is obviously not the same character, at least not the same version of Galadriel that we see in Lord of the Rings, but she's also still very much in character with this, kind of feistier, driven version, a more ambitious version of Galadriel, and I think that's because, yes, you have a
No, I was
thought?
just gonna say though what I do love is when she's offered the ring
Mm-hmm.
and it tempts her,
Yeah.
right? That's the same character, right? I'm not messing
Yes.
that up, am I?
You
Right?
got it. You
That
got it.
that that you do see that flash where it like rages up in her. So that's in there somewhere. I kind of love that.
Yes.
We're getting a greater understanding of
Yes.
that through this show.
Exactly. So it's like that has been her, and I hope that they explore. There's a line in that scene in the book where she says that she's thought about what she would do if she had been offered the ring for a long time. And so I hope that they play with that. I hope they explore like what's maybe not so much a vengeance or like a Galadriel seeking revenge, but what's a Galadriel look like that wants to use, every tool in her toolbox to take out Sauron? And is there more to it than just, he led to the death of her brother? Um, and also, how does she move on from that? Like how does she grow personally? Does she ever change her mind about orcs? I hope that we see some interesting things there. I think there's a lot to play with. And I think that the ultimate goal is probably to get us to the beginning of the Peter Jackson movies. I
I would
mean,
assume,
yeah, so
or at least getting us to see the
yes.
line to the Peter Jackson
Yeah.
movies. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it'll be. I think there's a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of interesting ways that could go.
I just want to. I'm going to call it two quick Andor things that I love, and
Yeah.
then like I want you to make a prediction. I want you to give me a prediction on, like a fun guess of where you think we're going season 2, and I'm going to give everybody an Andor prediction.
Okay.
I wanted to also, continuing with our theme of sort of like the twists and the reveals and rounding it out. And I'm staring at a screen so I can remember the name, but the Deidre Miro is our, ambitious, rising, the blonde inquisitor from the secret police of the Empire, whatever they're calling that.
Right.
You almost forget she's with the bad guys for a while. You're sort of rolling with her for a while in the series.
Yeah.
You're sort of sympathetic with her. And then in this most recent episode, you're like, oh, right. No, like she's the Gestapo. Like right? Like she's like the Nazi lead. And I think that like it's sort of the, it's similar and inverse of like what I was talking about with the Dwarven betrothed princess. Thank you.
They are married.
Married. Sorry. I guess by princess, I meant princess. Like, yeah. And it's it takes a real high level of craftsmanship and skill to, with all we know about the Empire at this point of our Star Wars existence, to be able to kind of look past that until it's like twisted and like no, like bad stuff. And she crossed paths, which was inevitable, with our like low level but like loyal. He's almost the equivalent of the guy that wrote the manifesto for that where they did the heist. He's like true to the order, but like he has the most like Joker villain origin story with that mom.
I know.
Which felt like, to be totally honest, a little anti-Semitic, but maybe I'm projecting.
Yeah,
The sort of the nagging mom, but and just this relentless kind of like pecking at him, and again, taking the time to give you that story is just something we don't see in these worlds. So kudos again to these shows.
Yeah, absolutely love that, and I think it makes it's so interesting because it's like not only is our main good guy not necessarily like on the side of like objective good,
Mm,
but our bad guys are kind of just like, I mean,
trying to do their
obviously we've
jobs.
got Cyril. He is, I mean, clearly like a corporate goon, but
Hmm.
he is, as we spend more time with him, he's just kind of like sad and has like a very clear like sense of justice, though I think it's misplaced. And
Yeah.
then,
No, he believes in order and like wants to advocate. He broke the rules because he wants to do what's right. He even has that scene.
Sauron vibes, honestly, when you put it like
Oh,
that.
he
That's
has
exactly
that
what
scene.
Sauron
That's a
wants
good
to
point.
do.
That's a good point. He has that scene very early on where like the subordinate, the captain, when they're gonna put the boots on the ground, he's like, no, 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 you have to take this serious. He's like, right, right, like I'm doing the right thing. Like he's
Hmm.
looking for that approval.
Totally.
But he believes he is like what is right is the side he's on.
Yeah, like I just like the disappointment when his commanding officer right at the beginning when he was like telling him to basically brush the death of those two
Right,
guys under the rug.
right,
And it's like us as the audience, we want to be like, yeah, like let Cassian go, but he
totally.
was very much, I mean, and obviously like you should probably be more upset about, like, from his perspective, he doesn't know the circumstances, that those guys were kind of gross and that
Hmm.
there's just murdered in cold blood from his
Yeah.
perspective. So like I totally
Well,
get
and it
it.
was a murder in cold blood, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the
I
first
mean,
one
they
was
were
an
jumping
accident.
him.
No, no, no,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
wait, the first
But the
one was an
second one,
accident. He's
yeah.
shining back. The second one, he made a very clear. I mean, that talk about establishing the blurry lines. The very
Yes.
first scene, he makes the active choice to murder.
Mhm.
It was not that was
Mhm.
not a forced hand. I
Yeah,
mean, we
that's
know why
true.
he did it, right? He feels like
Yeah.
this guy is definitely going to run on him, whatever.
Yeah.
Same thing. He also kills the guy who says, "Hey, let's split the money." Now,
Oh,
I
yeah.
could argue that he does that because he
Right.
realizes that if he said no, he was going to get killed, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
he's doing everything he's doing from his justification of survival.
Right.
But in actual like gun to the head terms, he
Yeah.
isn't threatened.
And I think it's also helping us set up a better understanding of the world that the Empire has created, that's kind of like kill or
Mm,
be killed thing.
it's
And
a
it's like,
great point.
they imply it a little bit with like Han Solo and like who shot first, but it's like Han. But and
Right.
like how someone like Han could become that, but it's like it's a little more rough and tumble than that.
That's a
Uh,
great point. It's a great point. The circumstances, and I have to think this is meta commentary on our world right now.
mhm,
But the
mhm.
circumstances of the crumbling infrastructure of what you've known as the right and the wrong and the sort of like rules in which we all agree society is supposed to function under, as those
Mhm.
things crumble away, and finances grow thinner, and we begin to struggle to trust what information we're getting. What kind of pressure does that put on a people, and what kind of an environment does it create where they can do things that might seem inconceivable
Mhm.
under more prosperous times?
Yeah, and I wonder if that is what we're going to see more of in season 2, with Sauron kind of free to do whatever he wants and people in kind of really shitty circumstances maybe being offered something that sounds really good and could make their lives
And
better.
the distrust of and again, a little meta commentary, but the distrust of the elves to the humans to the dwarves to the of each other,
Mhm.
using that as leverage
Yep.
and that sort of prejudiced hatred to grow his support, which we
Yeah.
know does happen, right?
Yeah.
All right, give me a prediction for season 2. Give me like what's your most fun prediction about season 2?
For which one? For
Well,
Rings of
we're not
Power?
done with Andor yet, so yeah, for Rings of
Okay.
Power, give me your most
For
fun
Rings of
prediction.
Power, I feel like my prediction is that we're gonna get to hang out with Sauron for a lot more, and how
Mm.
and like I think it's gonna be same actor. So, and I think that he really did a wonderful job in that scene with Galadriel at episode 8, where he flipped that switch of kind of
Mm-hmm.
showing like his true colors. And so I hope that we get to see the many shades of those colors, because I think that Sauron is a character that I desperately want to like and hate how much that I like him. Do you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
because he is able to sway so many people, and I want to
And they
see
cast
him
somebody
do
great
that.
for that.
Yeah.
They cast somebody great for that. That guy is
Yeah.
instantly a guy you're like attracted to and totally distrust at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, it's bizarre, right? And
Mhm.
it's like I don't know how they did that,
No,
but
it's brilliant
I
casting.
really want to
We all know those guys.
see. Yeah, I really want to see him like become more of just a regular character. It's like we kind of get to know his full intentions, and we'll get to know them more, I hope, and also see like how he is able to operate and like make things happen, and maybe be a little bit evil, but also I think he'll be really fun to watch
Yeah. Dude, his
in on the
visual
way.
resemblance to Viggo Mortensen is not a mistake
No,
either. Like that is
no,
very clear that they were
that
trying to
wig was
do
on purpose.
that.
Yeah.
All right. So here's my Andor prediction, not for future season, but by the end of the season. So our ambitious ladder climbing Secret Service woman,
Yes.
Deidre, I think that's the long lost sister that he's trying to find, which would be very Star Wars.
Do you think she dyed her hair?
Well, I know the only thing well, she definitely dyes her hair. You can see that in the things, but
Yeah.
she is of a completely different coloring. But like,
Mhm.
whatever, it's Star Wars. I'm
It's
just
Star
saying,
Wars.
you
Yeah.
know, and that the only thing working against that theory in my mind is that they really don't look alike at all. But
Does that matter though?
story building wise,
Mhm.
it makes a ton of sense to build to that structure. She, there is an ambiguity to her background. She is a
Mhm.
striver. You don't quite know why and how she got there. She does function with a different set of rules. Um, and it would make a lot of narrative sense. It would be a really good twist. And they seem like they're the right age. It
Mhm.
feels like it's building that way.
Yeah.
That she's trying to track down this guy, and when she finds him, and it would be so on Star Wars brand, right? For them
Yeah.
to literally be
And I
sisters.
could just see like Cyril's face being like so disappointed if
Right.
they like
Right.
realize that they're related.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be
So
interesting. I'm here
that's my
for
fun.
it.
That's my fun prediction.
I like it.
All right. Well, you've given me an hour of your time. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. I hope you will come back and we can talk about more fun things.
Yeah,
And I'm
whenever you
sure I will
want.
see you on the TikToks.
Yes,
We,
absolutely.
we 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 see each other a lot on the TikToks.
I know.
Thanks out there, audience, for joining us. More stuff coming. I do have to do some traveling for work, but I'm going to try to find a way to sneak in shows here and there. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the shows.